Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red Channel. I'm Josh Williams and I'm joined again by Andrew Beasley. Second week running, mate. How you feel?
Yeah, good. Good to be back. Lots to discuss, obviously, with the crazy match we had last weekend and the disappointing transfer news we've had midweek. So, I think plenty for us to get our teeth into this week.
Yeah, well, you'll be joining me for the rest of the month. I can give our listeners that much in terms of what lies ahead in the future. But in terms of this week's episode, as you say, we have two, suppose, overriding talking points to address. One of them is obviously the news around Jude Bellingham, which we will get to, and the other is the chaotic match that happened against Arsenal. Probably one of the best matches of the season, really, in terms of a neutral perspective, entertainment and all that stuff. But I think in terms of the game overall, mate, I don't know about you, but I thought it was very much a game of two halves. Standard cliche, but I think that was how it went.
Yeah, I mean, not to sort of lean too heavily on cliches, but you sometimes hear a game saying it's like, oh, well, that sums up a team's season. I mean, that game basically summed up Liverpool's season, didn't it? Because we saw the Liverpool that have been far too defensively open this season. And then we also saw a glimpse of the Liverpool that has scored 7 goals a couple of times and 9 goals another time. You know, all right, they didn't do that, but they had the chances to score far more than the 2 goals they ultimately did. So we sort of saw both sides of Liverpool. And as you say, it was pretty much a game of two halves, a game of sort of 40 minutes and 50 minutes, I suppose, kind of hinging on that Granit Xhaka moment with Trent Alexander-Arnold. I mean, whether that did tip the balance, I think that might be going a bit far, but it certainly got the crowd going. And Liverpool scored immediately afterwards and never really looked back from there and were probably unlucky not to win, which when they were 2-0 down as early as they were, I mean, you've never thought that. So, just so much to sort of talk about from that game, and we even had a linesman elbowing a player. I mean, it literally had everything. I think.
Yeah, that was crazy. That, but if we touch on the early stages of the game, obviously Liverpool just struggled to compete. I thought Arsenal were very, very good. One of the best teams I've seen at Anfield in terms of the first half an hour at least. Liverpool, I mean, the second goal in particular, I think off the top of my head, the Gabriel Jesus header, really bad goal to concede, just not aggressive enough, not tight enough, giving these world-class technicians time and space to make decisions and to make passes, and as a result of that, they play straight through it. And I do think it kind of almost highlighted what you mentioned last week, really, when I said to you, what's your diagnosis in terms of issues for the season? You touched on pressure on the ball, essentially, and I think that was evident in the first half an hour of the game against Arsenal.
Yeah, it felt like one of those games where you sort of have to say, at first hand, it looks like Arsenal played really well. And I think they probably did. But at the same time, how much of it was just Liverpool playing badly and making it all too easy for them? I mean, with the first goal, there was an unfortunate slip by Robertson sort of in the build-up and stuff like that. But you just sort of feel like you sort of make your own luck in those situations. And, Liverpool probably deserved to concede that. And, yeah, maybe the second goal was even worse. I mean, I was sort of looking at some stuff this week, might actually write about it today, but like Liverpool basically never used to concede headed goals when Alisson and Van Dijk were playing. I think there was something like 3 or 4 in open play in 4 seasons, and that was the 4th one, I think, this season. And it was just so easy. I mean, the player was able to cross, even though there was 2 defenders there. I think it was Martinelli. He had Trent and Konate near him. He was still able to deliver a cross, and then Jesus is sort of between Van Dijk and Robertson, and neither of them are marking him either. And then obviously Alisson's got no chance with a free header from whatever it was, 6 yards out and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, credit to Arsenal for how they played in that sort of opening half an hour, 45 minutes. But Liverpool did just make it too easy for them, really, didn't they?
Yeah, it did sum up many of the issues of the season. But you touched on the Xhaka moment there. This is the kind of thing that I would use this podcast to completely debunk, to be honest, because that's the kind of narrative that the media in particular tend to love. Journalists play on it, and Sky Sports, the likes of that, love all that stuff. But usually I would play that down. But I think in this case, I actually think there's an element of truth behind it, because if there's one thing that Liverpool have lacked this season, For me, it is intensity against the ball. Liverpool have been too nice, too easy to play against, too easy to cut open. And a lot of that has stemmed from players almost lacking, it does sound a little bit Yadar, but almost lacking that fire to actually want to regain the ball and make it difficult for your opponent type thing. And whatever Xhaka did, I mean, it was only a minor thing, but it did seem to ignite the ground. It did seem to ignite Liverpool's defensive game a little bit in terms of just getting that bit tighter, just being that bit more aggressive. And I also think it had a massive impact on Trent and his willingness to, or his desire to actually get tight to his man, put a foot in, don't just let him play. You know, this isn't like a game of football in the park. This is like a competitive game where you're supposed to be competitive in your attempts to win the ball. And that moment did seem to impact, it did seem to wake Liverpool up. As cliche as it sounds, I do think it had that impact on the game, I really do.
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy sort of headline or story or narrative to make, particularly because it was Granit Xhaka, because obviously in the past he's made his mistakes and he's been, you know, sent off for silly challenges and stuff like that. So as soon as he does something of that ilk again, it's an easy line to say, well, you know, Xhaka did this and then the game turned. But it did seem to happen, and I'm sort of with you. I think too much can be made of these things, but it did seem to instigate a change. I mean, obviously we'll never know, but Liverpool basically scored directly from the free kick that came from that moment just before half-time. Well, if nothing comes of that and they go in 2-0 down, you know, the crowd might be flat again in the second half. The team might be flat again in the second half. Obviously, as I say, we won't know that. But it did seem to fire them up. And obviously they got the goal, and then they sort of kicked on and utterly dominated the second half in the way that we haven't seen. And I think it sort of raises an interesting point as well about Liverpool this season. We know they've struggled on the road, and that playing in sort of hostile away grounds never really seemed to bother them when they were at their best. But obviously being at their best will have helped with that. And obviously, you know, perhaps it has been affecting them a bit more this season, playing away from home. Obviously, they had a season of playing behind closed doors, and I think that had the largest percentage of away wins we've ever seen in the league. So it's probably not coincidence. So perhaps they have struggled with the crowds, and obviously having the home crowd behind them, you know, seemed to make a difference. So perhaps we do owe, you know, Granit Xhaka a beer or something for what he did. But yeah, I don't normally agree with that sort of thing either, but it did seem to play a part on Sunday.
I mean, to be honest though, it is a tiny bit of a worry, simply because you touch on the away performances there and things like that, and I think that the lack of intensity that Liverpool have shown defensively this season, a lot of it does look, according to the eye test at least, as it could look like a lack of motivation. It looks like a lack of hunger, and it's kind of like we've completed it, mate. You know, we don't really fancy doing it again. We're not really that bothered anymore type thing. It has looked a little bit like that. And if it wasn't Jurgen Klopp in charge, I would have bigger concerns about that Liverpool are just not particularly motivated. Like, if you look over at the Etihad, I think it's interesting how Pep has just kind of moved away from really seasoned performers and dropped them pretty quickly at the first sign of, like, that lack of motivation. Like, say, for example, Cancelo, he's now at Bayern Munich. Phil Foden, so gifted, but just never plays for Manchester City this season at least. And some of that seems to stem from what he's like on the training ground. Laporte, I think, is having issues at the minute in terms of his availability and stuff like that. And I think he's putting cryptic things up on social media that I've seen. Kyle Walker can't get in the team. And I don't think Klopp has as much of a luxury to make those rotations at Anfield, just in comparison to the depth that City have. I think they're all roughly the same level, whereas Liverpool seem to have a bit more first strings and second strings. But the whole motivation thing, again, it's an intangible, isn't it? We can't really put a number on this or anything like that. But the way in which Liverpool reacted to that kind of that Xhaka moment, and the way Liverpool have reacted in certain big games this season, like up until recently, Liverpool's record in big games was really good. You know, we beat Manchester United 7-0, beat City at home. We've now drew with Arsenal, top of the league. And those are big games that you really don't need much motivation for, because it's already there. You know you've got to turn up. So I'm not really sure what I'm getting at here, but what do you think? What do you think of that? You see what I mean? Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, as you say, it's sort of impossible for us to know. You'd have to sit each player down individually and ask them. I mean, I think obviously Guardiola has a clear advantage in the sense that he can, bomb out Cancelo and he'll get a new 50 million fullback this summer probably to replace him. I mean, that's his sort of standard operating procedure is to buy a new fullback when something goes a bit wrong or whatever. And obviously Klopp doesn't have the ability to do that. You know, he does get accused of being too loyal. And whether that's the case or not, he's also operating in a situation where we know that Liverpool aren't going to buy loads of expensive players summer after summer. And, you know, hopefully they get a few this year. But you know what I mean? He can't be as ruthless with his squad for the simple reason that if he bombed out all these players, who's he going to get in to replace them? And on the motivation point, I'm not sure. I mean, I still think that the sort of disappointing end of last season will have taken a toll. I think it's fair to question, the sort of physical preparation and build-up, whether that's been right with Liverpool this season. I think they admitted they got the pre-season wrong, and they've sort of been on the back foot from the get-go on that. And obviously, the injuries have played a huge part. They've lost a lot more players to injury than other teams, or at least playing time and games lost and things like this. I mean, I think it's probably human nature that there will be a sort of motivation question because, as you said, I mean, they've won everything. They haven't yet won the Europa League, and it's looking like they might, at best, have a chance of doing that next season. So perhaps that'll be a bit of motivation. But it's sort of human nature to wonder if that is an issue. I think it's been more a physical thing than a mental thing. But obviously, the performances may suggest otherwise. They haven't had that intensity, be it physical, be it mental. It's been perhaps the biggest issue of the season, and to see them perform like they did in the second half against Arsenal, it's almost frustrating, as I think you said, almost like a negative in a way, because it just makes you think, well, where has this been? Why has this? We perhaps can't expect it for 90 minutes every week, but there's been so many flat performances that you have to question where has it been for at least some of those games. Why have they not been able to deliver that level of intensity? Because on the whole, it hasn't been there, and they've clearly still got it. And it shouldn't just take a bad foul from an opposition player to bring it out of them, really.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of I do think it's predominantly physical, but in terms of the mental side, you mentioned that Liverpool have won everything, and I do think it's interesting that one of Liverpool's better performances this season was in the first game of the campaign in the, I don't know if it's called the Community or the Charity Shield anymore, to be honest, but we beat Manchester City 3-1, I think, and we were very much on it on the day. I felt we performed really well, and I think after the game, can't remember who it was. It might have been Milner, might have been Trent. One of them said that we wanted to start our season today. We really wanted to go for this because this is the one trophy that we haven't got. The one thing we haven't won. Obviously, they go and win it, and it does feel a little bit. Maybe I'm just putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5 here, but it does feel a little bit like that was the kind of moment where they were like, "We've completed it. We've done it," and then the next game was Fulham, and we deserved to lose, in my opinion, on that day. Then we go to Palace, draw. Then we go to Manchester United, lose, and it's kind of snowballed from there, I think. But I don't know, that the mental thing, as I said, I don't really question these players in terms of being mentality monsters necessarily. It's more a case of like the motivation to go and do it all again when you have technically already done it all and it's still the same faces. And this is kind of why you need new players, I suppose. I've seen an interview not too long ago, BT Sports, Rio Ferdinand was speaking to Pep Guardiola, and he kind of asked him, how do you get players to keep going, to keep doing it for you over and over and over again after winning so much? And Guardiola asked him, how many Premier Leagues did you win? Rio Ferdinand said 6, and Pep said, was the team the same at the start compared to the 6th? And Rio said no, and and Pep just kind of put his hands up and said, you have to change. It's hard. It's not nice, but you have to change. And maybe Liverpool haven't done enough of that to keep things fresh. And obviously we're suffering from it at the moment. But as you say, against Arsenal, we performed pretty well. And the numbers highlight that. So Arsenal posted their fewest number of shots all season in the Premier League with 9, I think. They faced their most shots, I think, in any game in the Premier League this season with 21, I think it was. And game state did play a part because towards the end of the game, Arsenal were kind of, they were substituting on centre-backs and just trying to hold on to their lead. But Liverpool posted an expected goals of 3.9, obviously including a penalty. But Bees, that is a lot.
It is a lot. I mean, I think it's one of those games with the sort of nature of some of the chances that the expected goals figures vary depending on where you look. I mean, 538 had it as 5.1 for Liverpool, which I think was a little bit generous. When one of them is like Konate trying to chest the ball in, they perhaps gave that a higher rating than it was truly worth. But yeah, I mean, it was that sort of level of attacking performance. I mean, if you look at the understat model isn't necessarily the best, but it is one that covers the entirety of the Klopp era, where a lot of others don't. And on their model, it was Liverpool's 4th best attacking performance in the league under Klopp. I think they gave it 4.6 XG or something like that. And some of the other games that have been better, there was a 6-0 against Leeds last season, but Liverpool had 2 penalties in that game, so you can kind of ignore that. And another one against Hull in 2016-17. I think they might have had 2 penalties in that. But, we're talking about games against sort of relegation-threatened teams. I mean, this is against the league leaders, and they're putting up, let's call it 4 expected goals, give or take, depending on which model you look at. And the thing with that as well, I mean, I haven't sort of looked at the breakdown too closely, but again, an enormous chunk of that will be in the second half. They didn't create a lot. Certainly for the first sort of 40 minutes, I think Salah had one big chance from a Henderson pass, but really, they hadn't created very much at all prior to the Salah goal, and so they're sort of registering probably 3 expected goals against the league leaders in the second half, and all right, there's a penalty in there, but I mean that's just remarkable, and as well the figure of 8, they had 8 big chances according to Opta. And I think it's the first time any team's had 8 this season. It's pretty rare. I can remember a game Liverpool had at Tottenham in 13-14 when they won 5-0. You might remember that one.
Flanagan.
Liverpool, I think Liverpool had 8 big chances that day. Sorry?
John Flanagan scored on that one, I think.
Yes, that is the game. Yeah. But I mean, they had 8 big chances that day. I don't think they've had it since, or it's really, really rare. And I mean, bear in mind as well, that's against a Tottenham team who sacked their manager the next day and were happy to appoint Tim Sherwood. I mean, that is not a serious or a good football team that Liverpool had 8 big chances against. And all right, it was away from home, but they've done it against the league leaders. And I think pretty much all of them were created, as in they were not coming about from opposition, defensive errors on the ball, or they were from, rebounds and making the most of this. This is one player passing to another to create a big chance. I mean, it's incredible that they had 8 of them against a team as good as Arsenal. Perhaps you can argue Arsenal aren't quite as good as their results have been this season. I think that's perhaps fair. But no, I mean, the attacking performance, I mean, you can have no complaints aside from, they should have scored more than 2 goals.
Yeah, it felt like Anfield certainly influenced the game. I think it's influenced Arsenal over the years, certainly. And it's a little bit of a hoodoo over Arsenal. But in the first half, they played like that wasn't the case. And then gradually, maybe it gets in their heads a little bit and it starts to change. But one of the reasons Liverpool posted such a high shot total, expected goals total, whatever you want to call it, is because of the man who missed the penalty, actually. But aside from missing the penalty, he was extremely involved. And one of the reasons he was so involved was because Liverpool adopted a new shape. It was an interesting one, caught us off guard. Obviously, it was 4-3-3 on the defensive side of the game, but when Liverpool had possession, Trent was drifted into central midfield to play next to Fabinho as like a double pivot. And on the back of him making that movement, Robertson would tuck inside and form a back 3 with Virgil van Dijk and Ibrahima Konate. And Henderson and Jones would push up. And you kind of had this 3-2-5 shape going on. which is what Arsenal have used all season, funnily enough, well, most of the season, and also what City are using now with who's making the same, John Stones making the same movement for Manchester City. So it's very in vogue at the minute, very in trend. I didn't overly expect it, but what did you think of it?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it either. I thought it was interesting that Klopp said in his press conference something about, oh, we've done this before, but maybe not to the same extent. I mean, it certainly hasn't felt like they've done it to anywhere near the extent, at least as far as I've noticed. I mean, like you say, sort of in vogue. I mean, it's this thing like you go through spells in the Premier League where, Antonio Conte had success at Chelsea with a back three. So all of a sudden, half the teams are playing a back three to sort of try and copy that. And maybe there's sort of an element of that here. Like you say, City and Arsenal have played in that way. But when you look at the sort of like average positions for Trent, I mean, obviously average positions aren't, perfect by any means, because it shows you just the average of all the touches and stuff like that. But it's certainly his furthest in and closest to the centre circle, at least in the last 2 seasons I looked at. So that it appears to have been a very definite shift. And I think in the first half, it was fair to question if it was working. It didn't feel like it was. Certainly sort of from when you're watching it as a fan, it's hard to have a sort of clear-headed perspective on it, but it didn't sort of feel like it was working. And then obviously the second half is slightly different because it was all pretty much Liverpool sort of keeping Arsenal penned in. So it didn't feel like it was as obvious a thing there. But it's certainly an interesting one. I mean, to see if they'll use it going forward. I mean, did you think it was working in the first half? I mean, I guess Arsenal's performance would suggest it wasn't, but I mean, what did you make of it? It certainly stood out. I don't think it was working, but I don't know.
No, I don't overly think it was working, but I checked Twitter, which you should never do, really, but I checked Twitter and I saw a lot of people just absolutely panic stations, just terrified at the thought of this change and the fact we weren't playing well. They were putting everything down to this tactical shift, and it's not working. Go back to 4-3 and all this. And I think in certain situations like that, you have to be a little bit more patient, because I think even if you come up with a different strategy like that, the bottom line is your application still has to be top notch for any kind of system to work as intended. Arsenal were playing the same shape essentially, but it was just working a lot better for them because they played better with the ball, made better decisions on the ball, and B, were better defensively than Liverpool in terms of regaining it. So that helps a lot. And then just gradually as the game goes on, those roles kind of reverse. Liverpool up the intensity, start making better decisions on the ball, be a bit more confident on the ball, and then it starts to normalise a bit then. So I think when you introduce these changes, you can't really introduce it for 25 minutes, panic, and just start screaming on the pitch, go back to normal. You can't really be doing that. So I don't think it was ideal. I think it was a bold move to introduce it for a match against Arsenal, of all teams. And in terms of Trent, I thought that Klopp comment was curious, because I think, I mean, as I said, I checked Twitter and I saw some people saying Trent has been inverting like this for the past 12, 18 months. For me, absolutely no chance. He's been inverting, definitely. But as far as I'm concerned, all of his inverting takes place in the final third / opponent's half. Liverpool were doing this from Alisson, from the goalkeeper. Trent was playing as almost like a DM, like a double six with Fabinho. I haven't seen that. I don't think that this has been the thing that we've done before, really. So it was definitely a big shift. And it's going to be interesting to see if Klopp keeps this moving forward, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's happened before. His inverting has been sort of in the final third, moving up the flank with the ball, maybe exchange with Henderson or Salah, who's ever there, and sort of move inside and try and do stuff from there. I've not noticed it happening sort of further back. Thinking about it afterwards, it sort of reminded me, it's different, but it sort of reminded me of that game at, I think it was Brighton in the FA Cup recently, where he played a front three of Elliott, Gakpo and Salah, and everyone was questioning the order of the players across left to right, thinking that maybe Salah should be central, Gakpo on the left. But of course, Klopp was doing it thinking, well, I've got Núñez to come back on the left and maybe that will work out. And we saw against the likes of Man United that it did. So he's not averse to doing these things that take the fans or the opposition by surprise, that seem really strange, but actually in the long term sort of play out. So it will be interesting to see if this is similar. I mean, it's a bold move to do it in such a big game against such a strong team and a team in such good form and playing confidently and stuff like that. You know, we've seen various sort of tactical changes this season. I mean, obviously earlier on there was the spell of sort of different formations and stuff after that Brighton 3-3. They sort of ripped it up and tried various different things. And this is just another one to add to that. Obviously the previous ones were didn't really last too long. So we'll have to wait and see if this does the same. But I don't know. I sort of feel like they kind of overthink things with Trent. I mean, I can't help thinking that he does all his best work, you know, basically as a right back, an attacking right back. But, you know, that's when he's had his sort of best runs in the team and stuff like this. I mean, I can't get away from the fact that, you know, he once got 21 assists in a run of 38 league games. Now, it's across 2 seasons. It wasn't in a season, but like the record for assists in a Premier League season is 20. And he's topped that in effectively a season, playing as a right back, delivering crosses from out wide and stuff like that. And, you know, I know you use the phrase galaxy brain and stuff like that, but whether it's sort of overthinking Trent's position, but it's like you've literally made the most creative player in Premier League history, you could argue, 21 assists in 38 games. And now you're moving around and asking him to do these different things. And if he even manages to match that, it'll be good. But it doesn't, you know, you'll then lose the assists from right back. It doesn't automatically mean he's going to get 30 assists playing these different positions and stuff like that. So it's an interesting one, but I always think they're sort of overthinking it. It'll take a long spell of seeing this for me to be convinced that it's the best way to use him when he's been so effective in the past. But not that I'm claiming to know more than Klopp, of course, but I don't know. It feels like, it doesn't feel like the right move to me, but Klopp could argue, well, maybe Trent's lost his motivation. We were talking about that earlier. Maybe he's lost his motivation as a right back. It's certainly looked that way with some of his defending this season, as if he can't be bothered. I can't imagine that's entirely true, but maybe he thinks, well, I'll get more out of Trent by freshening up his role in the team and more for the team. But I think we've got a long way to go until we can be certain that that's the case anyway.
Yeah, well, one of the issues is that I don't think Robertson could do it from the opposite side. And I think in terms of Trent being this right-sided attacking presence who's so creative and stuff, I think previous years, the way in which we've compensated for that going the opposite way is we've had a marathon man in Jordan Henderson covering for him relentlessly. And we've had a midfield department that has been able to control games and sweep up any loose balls that stem from Trent's risks. As of right now, at least, up until potentially the summer, we don't have as much of a safety net to protect the team from Trent's risks. So I suppose moving him into the centre to play as a 6 alongside Fabinho at times could potentially resolve that for the next couple of weeks / months, up until a point where we potentially get fresh legs in the summer and somebody who can cover him going the other way, like a peak Jordan Henderson. But in terms of Salah, touched on Salah there. Salah is obviously one of the main beneficiaries of this if it does stay. I touched that he was very involved. So he's never taken more shots in a Premier League game than his total of 9 against Arsenal. Top of the league, by the way, 9 shots. And on top of that, it's 10 really if you include the penalty, which we don't do, but it's 9 shots is a lot essentially. I think his average for the season is probably around 3 per 90. So to take 9 is daft. It was also his most expected goals in a single game for the season. That's non-penalty as well. That's not including the penalty that he took. It was his most touches in a Premier League game this season, and by some distance as well. I think he took 67 touches. I think his previous best was around 53 for the season. So that's quite a jump. And I think his average across his Liverpool career is about 43-ish, I think. So 67 is a lot. And again, it's against the top of the league, remember. And on top of that, he posted his joint most attempted dribbles in a Premier League game this season with 7. But he completed none of them. He succeeded with none of his dribbles, which isn't great. And I suppose we have to pat Gabriel on his back for that, really. I think he performed really well. I think maybe Klopp expected Zinchenko to be up against Salah. But I suppose that's what this 3-2-5 system does. It kind of clogs the middle, attracts players into the middle, and if Trent is going away from the right towards the middle, it kind of leaves the whole of the right side for Salah, and passing lanes open up to him a lot. He can engage in 1v1s a lot, and it should benefit him. I don't think it didn't feel like he played particularly well in terms of like maybe his end product. But then you look at the fact he's posted 9 shots and you think, with most touches and stuff, that's not a bad thing. I always try to praise these players who post a lot of shots, even if they don't score too much. I've always tried to put praise on the players who get the shots because I think it's a quality. I think it's a skill.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, we won't be seeing 9 or 10 shots from him every week. But in fairness to Klopp, I mean, he's been criticised quite a lot for a lot of things this season. But I mean, certainly Salah's sort of lack of involvement, being sort of too wide at times, things like that. And I think it was one of those things. Again, possibly it was a little bit overblown. I mean, I know there was some stats floating around that he was basically having the same proportion of his touches on the sort of wide areas as he ever has. It sort of perhaps just felt like it more because he wasn't contributing quite as much. But I mean, anything that brings him into the game more is a good thing. And I think 9 shots. I mean, there's a couple of big chances in there. I'm not saying they were all brilliant decisions to shoot, but he could easily have had more. He also set up that chance for Nunez. That was Salah created that. Another big chance for Liverpool there. The dribbles thing is interesting. I think I've written about it in the past. It's long been an issue. Sort of Liverpool don't dribble past teams very much at all, and the sort of natural thing with Liverpool is to think, they've spotted something in the data that means that they're sort of not bothering, or they're not too concerned about it and stuff like that. But you saw, I think whether you saw this, I think Crystal Palace set a record for like dribbles completed against Leeds last weekend, and obviously with Leeds coming up this weekend for Liverpool, it'll be interesting to see if they try and do something similar. But yeah, I say it's a strange one. It didn't feel like Salah played brilliantly, but then you have to say, well, 10 shots and a big chance created is not to be sniffed at.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at Manchester City and Arsenal this season, this 3-2-5 shape, it does allow those wide players to get on the ball a lot and to engage in 1v1s with whoever they're facing. You think of Jack Grealish, Riyad Mahrez, Bukayo Saka, Gabriel Martinelli. All 4 of those players, you'd say, that have had really good seasons. And a lot of it stemmed from this. And as you say, Salah maybe hasn't been as involved as usual at Liverpool this season, even though he's still scoring plenty of goals and things like that. But if this is kept for the rest of the season, it'll be interesting to see just how involved he's able to become. Because if it was a Salah who was very much on his game in terms of his end product, he could have really cleaned up. He could have posted the hat-trick comfortably, considering he scored anyway. Then he got a penalty. And in addition to that, there was like a further 8 shots that didn't end up in the back of the net. So that's certainly one to watch. But I think overall, summing up the Arsenal game, I think for me, I tweeted this after the game, but it felt like a bit of a reminder for me, like a bit of a reassuring 45 minutes to suggest that you're never really as far away as you think. And although there's been talk this week actually about this overhaul that's kind of incoming, we do need bodies, definitely, but I don't think we're as far away as some people suggest.
No, I mean, I think we may have touched on this last week, but I mean, you only have to look really at Manchester United and how bad they were this season, and then last season, and then this season they're going to finish in the top 4. It looks like, and they've already got 1 trophy and potentially win a couple more. I mean, their turnaround since last season has been remarkable. And I obviously didn't watch every game, but I doubt they showed a half of football as good as Liverpool did in the second half last weekend. So things can turn around pretty quickly, and maybe this new formation is partly the way to do it. We'll have to wait and see. But I think some good additions this summer are obviously required, but it's not unreasonable to think that they could make a pretty immediate impact, and Liverpool could be sort of looking something like their best next season, pretty quickly. But I'm sure we'll talk about who's going to come in or who might come in, since there's one player who it seems is definitely not coming in, who we all thought it might be, and we're sort of pinning our hopes on. Is that too strong? I don't know. But obviously we were expecting Jude Bellingham, and that appears to now not be happening.
Yeah, well, there is the segue. I'll thank you for that assist, because that was very nice. That. But yeah, we're going to have to talk about it, aren't we? I sent out a newsletter yesterday, actually, and I introduced the newsletter by just saying everything was great on Tuesday night. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and then out of nowhere, there's a mass report from multiple different outlets that Liverpool have ended their pursuit of Jude Bellingham, for those who aren't aware. And the kind of word has been, he's going to cost too much, in the sense of Liverpool need a lot more than just one centre mid. So he's costing too much in that sense. As in, Liverpool are going to need more players. If we get Bellingham on his own, it's not going to allow us to invest in these other areas, that sort of thing. So, I mean, what was your reaction, mate? We'll start with that.
Well, it was funny because I was actually rehearsing with my band on Tuesday night, and then sort of switched my phone on afterwards, and it just sort of, various WhatsApp groups and tweets sort of flashing up and stuff like this. I mean, clearly it is disappointing news. I mean, as much as some of, optimists have pointed out that Liverpool ended their interest in Van Dijk and Alisson and stuff like that, and they did eventually sign those guys. You could cling to that as a sort of sign that that perhaps the deal isn't dead entirely. But I think that the underwriting logic of Liverpool need more than one player, and he would take up most of their budget, you would imagine, seems to sound logic. So it is disappointing. It does put pressure on the transfer business that they do. I mean, nobody can be certain that Bellingham would be an immediate hit, as good as he is. But clearly, fans would be very excited about next season if Bellingham had signed. And assuming he doesn't, they're almost certainly going to be underwhelmed by whoever they bring in, even if that's players of the standard of, Mason Mount, who's a, Champions League winner and, plays for England and stuff like this. It will still seem underwhelming compared to Bellingham, which probably isn't fair on the guys who will join this summer, but it's just the reality of the situation. I think, fans have got their hopes up so much about Bellingham, and obviously perhaps we in the media have to take some blame for that, because inevitably there's been a lot of stories written about Bellingham and what he can add and how Liverpool will improve and all these sorts of things. And obviously we write them because people want to read them, because people are excited by transfers. So it sort of works both ways. But yeah, clearly there was a lot of excitement about the potential of him joining. And like everyone, I will be disappointed if he doesn't. I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world. But as I say, I think it adds pressure on whoever comes in next, because they're not going to be Jude Bellingham. And that's what the fans were hoping for.
Yeah. I will take some of the blame, to be honest, because we've talked about him quite a lot on this show. We've talked about his numbers, plenty of Q&A questions about him, and I've sent newsletters out about him, because he's a very good player. He can do it all, and you don't get many of those centre mids. He's such a well-rounded centre mid, such a Klopp player, very Steven Gerrard in the sense that contributes across the board. He's not like a specialist in terms of, which is what a lot of midfielders tend to be like. If you think of what Henderson's good at, we all know what he's good at, and we all know what he's not so good at. If you think of the same with Harvey Elliott, it's clear. with Bellingham, just pretty much good at everything, and it's nice to have those players. And despite being 19, he's captain of his club. He's homegrown. He's English, got experience of England, obviously. Can play as a 6, can play as an 8, can play as a 10. He's physical. He covers a lot of distance. He's top of the Bundesliga this season for duels won. Scores plenty of big goals. Very progressive with his passing. Top of the Bundesliga for dribbles this season. He's just a special player. Generational probably, but I don't know. I don't know where to stand with this in terms of like whether we should believe that it's dead or whether it's negotiation tactics or whatever. Where do you stand on that one?
Yeah, like I said before, I think, we've seen similar situations in the past, but I'm inclined to believe it's probably dead, this one, as I say, just because the money probably needs to go on 3 players, not 1 player. I think Liverpool, unfortunately, have backed themselves into this corner. I mean, I think it's fair to ask the question, after they didn't get Tchouaméni last season, should they have gone for Bellingham then? I don't think it can't be a shock to them how much he's going to cost. So why has that suddenly sort of become the deciding factor as expensive as he's going to be? I thought it was interesting whether you want to share your opinion. I saw your Twitter poll about, is it better to sign 1 generational talent or, I can't remember how you phrased it, 2 very good players or whatever. I think people were siding on the generational talent last time I saw the vote. I could see both sides of the argument. I think it depends, doesn't it? When you can't divorce the financial aspect of it from the reality of it. A generational talent is fantastic, but if he destroys your transfer budget in the process, that's inevitably a consequence when you're running the way that Liverpool are. But I think I lean towards 2 players being better than 1. But have you come to a decision on that?
Yeah, well, for those who aren't aware, I said you've got a massive problem department in your squad that needs an upgrade. How would you rather tackle it? And one answer was 1 generational player, and the other answer was 2 very good players. And there was 2,530 votes, and 58.5% of the vote picked the generational player on his own, and 41.5% picked 2 very good players. Now, when I posted that, I didn't specifically... There's no right answer to it, and I didn't think there was a right answer at the time. I was kind of getting the consensus, really. I don't overly know what I think, but I think if somebody... If like a Chelsea fan had posted that and I was completely not invested, I think I would probably be like you in terms of leaning ever so slightly towards 2 very good players. But it depends on the size of the overhaul. Obviously, there's lots of context that is lacking in that question. I appreciate that. But in terms of Liverpool's current situation, I said in the newsletter this week, I don't really think it's if we want positives from this, I don't think it's Alisson Becker void in terms of, or a Van Dijk void in terms of like you're missing that one absolute pillar to transform a department or a particular problem that you're suffering from. Liverpool were absolutely leaking more goals than they deserved to concede when they signed Alisson, and him on his own was going to make a huge difference to that. In midfield, Liverpool just need to become intense again. They just need to become functional again, and we need to start putting pressure on the ball again. And you can do that without signing an absolute whale beater. As disappointing as it is to not sign him, if that's not going to happen, if it's not a no-goer, Liverpool can still get around this by signing 2 or 3 50 million players as opposed to 150 million player. Liverpool can still get around it, but the big thing, and it's a big if, it depends who you sign. It completely depends who you sign, because Liverpool have been linked with a whole host of names. Some of them I'm more keen on than others, and if we get it wrong in terms of the type of midfielder that we end up getting in, we will probably keep suffering from these issues. But if we get it right, it will probably disappear over the course of the summer, all these midfield concerns, and we'll probably be a different team next season, even without Bellingham. But you've got to get it right, and I've got a bit less faith that Liverpool are going to do that purely because Michael Edwards is no longer there. Ward is leaving at the end of the season. Ian Graham's leaving at the end of the season. So you just don't know. But I do think we have... if people want to hear it, I do think we can still become a great team again comfortably without getting Bellingham, as annoying as it is.
Yeah, I think as well, just one other thing on the Bellingham. I mean, obviously, I think people worry that, well, if he doesn't come to Liverpool, he's going to end up at Manchester City. And nobody, of a Liverpool persuasion would want to see that. I mean, that would just rub salt in the wound as well, wouldn't it? But I think you're right. I think, obviously, people looking at Liverpool's midfield have probably got concerns with all the players pretty much to some extent or other. Not that they're all bad players, but that, there are valid concerns about quite a lot of them. And Bellingham's only one man. They could bring him in and he'd still have to play with, like, say, Fabinho and Henderson, who people dislike. He can't solve it all on his own. But as you say, the big question mark is where they go in terms of who they buy and how well does it work, and do you have the faith that it can be repeated? I mean, I think, like you say, Ian Graham going, obviously, as a sort of stats guy myself, that's a disappointment, but it is good that Will Spearman, I think, is taking over, and he's a very smart guy as well. So hopefully they can sort of keep on that analytical track. But yeah, I think if they brought in, I'm just going to name, I'd say they brought in Mount and Nunes and maybe James Ward-Prowse if Southampton get relegated, something like that. I think there are, possibly better players out there, but I mean, would that be a good summer? Say 3 players like that. Say a good player who's sort of not, from a big side, and then somebody from a relegated side, and somewhere sort of in between. I mean, that sort of feels like the kind of summer Liverpool might have, something along those lines. But I mean, how would you feel if that was the summer?
I think I'd be concerned if those were the players. I'm not overly concerned how we do it in terms of if it is a relegated player. That wouldn't bother me. It would depend on who it is, essentially. I'm not... People who've been listening to my content over the past year or so will probably know my thoughts on Matheus Nunes. I think he's got a lot of potential, really good player, but absolutely does not solve what Liverpool have suffered from this season, in my opinion. I don't think it's a coincidence, for example. I don't think it's a coincidence that he's played a lot of the season at Wolves away from central midfield. He's been deployed on the left, on the right, I think, as a 10. And he's been tried in a 2. It didn't work. So I would rather us not go there, to be honest. I would rather us go for players who are going to restore that kind of workhorse, ball-winning energy in the centre of the pitch. Someone like Moises Caicedo, I think, is a good fit. I think Mount is a brilliant fit. I'd love Mason Mount. So I want to put it out there now, to be honest, that if we don't get Bellingham but we get Mount, that shouldn't result in us looking at Mount and thinking, it's just Mason Mount, isn't it? Mason Mount's a great player. So if we can sign Mason Mount, I'll be more than happy about that. And I think I said in the newsletter yesterday, someone like Manuel Ugarte looks really, really good for Sporting. His numbers look brilliant in terms of pressing and things like that. And he looks like an absolute dog on the midfield. So someone like that I would like. I've seen links with Youri Tielemans. Not sure about that one. I know he's free, but it feels a bit, well, free in the sense that, there's no transfer fee, but he is a bit like Fabinho for me in the sense that he's played an awful lot, considering he's 25, 26 or something now, but he's been playing like more than 2,000 minutes of league football. This is just in the league since the age of 16. So
yeah,
I would be concerned.
My point on Tielemans.
Yeah. I would be concerned that he's got... I don't see how he would address Liverpool's drop this season. That this is my big thing. Whoever we get in, they have to address Liverpool's drop in some way. They have to add energy and intensity and industry to the midfield. and they have to make it difficult for opponents to cut us open, and they have to provide us with a platform to take risks through Trent, through Salah, through Jota, whoever it may be. And we just haven't really had that platform this season. I think some of this as well, the whole overhaul thing, maybe not wanting to dedicate so much money to Bellingham because we want to dedicate money elsewhere. That does make me think maybe A, Klopp is wanting another centre-half this summer, or B, maybe he's not completely sold on Fabinho in terms of also wanting a 6, because we've been linked with a few 8s mostly. Declan Rice, for example, is a 6. I've seen some links to him lately. So maybe Klopp's starting to become like less and less convinced that Fabinho can just go again, and maybe we need another 6. And Bajcetic is injured; he can't really be expected to do it. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on Declan Rice.
I mean, he's a good player. I think he would be a good addition. I mean, I suppose someone like him probably, not to the same extent as Bellingham, but he would obviously take up a sizable sort of chunk of the budget, and it leaves you to wonder what else would be available for the other signings that they need to make if they were to get somebody like him. But I mean, I like him as a player. I think he'd be a good addition, but it all depends on this sort of, like we say, the balance of the finances, how they're going to make it all sort of work from there. I think as well, like you mentioned a minute ago about like Núñez being a good player, but not necessarily the right player. I mean, I think you could argue that's a concern about Liverpool's sort of recent transfer business. I mean, I think most people would agree that Cody Gakpo and Darwin Núñez are good players, but are they the players that Liverpool needed? When people say FSG haven't spent any money or Liverpool haven't spent any money, I mean, they have spent money. You can argue about whether they've spent it in the right areas recently, but they have spent money, and I think they've bought good players. It's just whether they were the right players for what the team needed, and making sure they sign the players that the team needs this summer is obviously vitally important, because if they don't, then I don't really know where they go from there. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you can sort out Rice for us, Josh, I'd be happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a decent link. I don't mind Declan Rice at all, but as I said, for me, he's more of a 6. So if we did get Declan Rice, for me, that would either spell the end of Fabinho in terms of a transfer, or it would suggest maybe Fabinho is going to be more of a second string or more of a rotation player or whatever. But I do think that Liverpool, I've been saying for ages, so long on this podcast, that Liverpool need midfielders, and it was a massive oversight last summer to not get a centre mid in, give Milner a new contract and get in Arthur Melo on loan. It was just a disaster, and it was clear to see at the time that was going to be a disaster. And this week, obviously, I mean, I've done this a million times this season, when you're just writing a Liverpool piece and you get to a point in the piece where you have to provide a very brief overview of the midfield and why it's a problem. And I wrote this week that, like, you've got Naby Keita and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain there, who were both injury prone and out of contract at the end of the summer. You've got Thiago and Jordan Henderson, who are both starters, but both aged 32. You've got Milner, who's 37. And you've got Fabinho, who's 29, going on 35, really. And then you've got Curtis Jones, who I think Klopp by now will have probably expected to come on a bit more than he has. I think he's been unlucky with that, mostly with that weird injuries and things like that. So that's been a shame. You've got Fabio Carvalho, who's just, I don't know what the plan's been with him, really. I mean, quite clearly number 10, we don't field number 10, so I'm not really sure what's going on with that one. Harvey Elliott is probably the only player who's lived up to any expectation in terms of development, but he's still only 20 as of earlier this month. So we do really have a problematic midfield there. I think by this stage, maybe, I think in comparison to what's actually happened, I think in their previous analysis of our midfield, I think Klopp will have maybe expected Fabinho to still be normal, Jones to have come on more than he has, and I think he'd have probably expected to just give a little extension to Naby Keita, whereas in reality, Fabinho's fell off a cliff, Naby's leaving, and Curtis Jones is where he was 2 seasons ago. So you really do have a and as I said, Thiago and Henderson are both 32. So you do have a massive void there, and it's minimum 2 players, possibly 3, depending on whether you want a 6 or not. Really.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously been talking about tactical changes and stuff like that. I mean, if they were to make a sort of permanent switch to a different formation, that may affect things. But yeah, I think 2 minimum is maybe underselling it. I mean, I was of that mindset, but as the season has gone on, I've probably switched to 3 minimum, and wouldn't take much for me to say 4 minimum. But
are you talking I think it's midfielders there or transfers as a whole?
No, I was talking midfielders. I mean, I'm sort of joking when I say 4, but I mean, I think I think 3. If you think that no Keita, no Oxlade-Chamberlain, probably no Milner, the issues you've mentioned with the other guys as well. I mean, you could make a case for 3, and I don't think that's ridiculous by any means to say that they need 3 just to sort of fill in the gaps and the issues that they've got. I mean, as well, just another point. I mean, like on Elliott and Carvalho. I mean, I think they both started together in the Merseyside derby at Goodison and stuff. I mean, they're like pretty much the shortest players in the Premier League. Or I think Elliott's the joint shortest player to make over like 10 starts or something like that. And they're good players on the ball and stuff like that. But they're not what Liverpool need in midfield necessarily, certainly from a defensive sort of standpoint. So just bringing in players with a bit more physicality and stuff like that. I mean, it isn't a simple question of, I'll just get some tall guys, but it sort of feels like it's sometimes just, some bigger units who can dominate physically a bit more, because for all their strengths, those guys aren't going to be able to do it. I mean, I think, again, possibly they were hoping that Curtis Jones could perhaps be that guy, and he's been unlucky with injuries, as you say, sort of eye injuries and things like that that you couldn't have possibly anticipated him getting. But obviously he's not played all that much in the last 18 months, so hasn't really sort of kicked on. Whether he's capable of it, I don't know, but he's not really had that opportunity. So there's sort of like there's an age issue at both ends of the spectrum. There's potentially a size issue, physicality issue, pressing issue. There's a lot of boxes that need to be ticked, and just to sort of bring us back around, Bellingham alone, as good as he is, wouldn't solve all those problems. He'd do a decent job at quite a few of them, but he can't do it on his own. So I'm not saying it's better not to get him, but that there is a world where not getting him and getting 3 very good players arguably would be the better outcome. But, we're a long way from that position at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I have touched earlier in the season on how, even though he is just one player, he is a lot in one player, as in almost 2 players in one to an extent. So I do think if we did get him in, he would do an awful lot to fixing what Liverpool have suffered from almost on his own. I don't think he'd solve it on his own, but he would do a lot. But you mentioned the physicality issue there. Me and Mo did a transfers podcast. I think it might have been like around the summer, and that was kind of like a staple criteria for the targets I mentioned at the time. But I do still think it's a concern. But for me, I think what I just want to see more than anything else is just a really hungry, horrible midfield again. Players who can really cover ground for fun, energy, industry, regain the ball a lot, pressing monsters. That's kind of what I want to see more than anything, really. And that's why I like the idea of Caicedo. I like the idea of Ugarte. Mason Mount's got that naturally attached to his game. Declan Rice is a ball winner. A player like Gavi would be perfect. But Caicedo, Ugarte, Gavi, they're all under 6 foot. Mason Mount as well, I think. So it's just going to be really interesting to see what Liverpool do, because it's haunted Klopp all season, and he's really being made to pay for the oversight that he delivered last summer. So, the club's had so much time here to prepare. We've got nothing to play for now for the rest of the season, really. So it's going to be so interesting to see what Liverpool do in the summer and how they tackle this massive problem. But because for me, it's very much still midfield, even though you've got other smaller concerns in that. But it's going to be interesting to see what midfielders Liverpool get in, basically. I'm sure it won't be the last that we've heard, though, of Jude Bellingham. Hopefully it's not. But Bees, thanks for joining us, mate.
No, pleasure, mate. Anytime. Always happy to talk these things through, even if we don't always have all the answers. But certainly a lot of interesting questions, as we've said.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be linked to more targets by the time we next join each other next week. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.